Welcome to yet another commentated fight. Today we're going to be taking a look at the second Standard Storm. We did do the commentary of the first one a while ago, but this is the second edition. If you don't already know, Standard Storm is sort of an event that's more competitively geared, but it's supposed to give both new players and already existing players a taste of competition. So it has a lot of prizes, but it's also geared at the beginning card fighters as well to have a taste of what competition really feels like in Vanguard. So I think we have a perfect finals for that as well, because we have Sharven on the left, who's only been playing for about 2 months if I'm not mistaken, versus Joshua Lee, who's a well-known player in Malaysia, who's been topping for a while and has been playing a Kagero main since early BTO 5 days. So this is definitely a good showcase of, the types of players that you see at this event. So Joshua does right into the bar and, starts off his first turn, and then we go back to Sharven, who is playing Novas, which we haven't really seen that much of in the competitive format. So he had to want to pass that Vanguard attack, but doesn't actually hit, and also, does deny this important counterblast for Joshua, because he could have potentially counterblasted one and soul blasted one with the Berserk and gotten himself an extra card in hand. So that actually ends up being a good thing. So we can see that Sharven does have to take the first 2 attacks. He does get the draw, however, but he is going to protect the third one. Going back to Sharven's turn, I'm still amazed that we're seeing some Nova Grappler gameplay at this stage, because a lot of people have agreed that Novas have fallen off and haven't really been popular, haven't really been topping, they're a bit too fragile, but Sharven here is really showing what the clan can do after being able to take it this far in the tournament. And I think the deck does have potential. I've been playing it a lot myself. It's definitely nice to see this as well. So he does call down the Burst Riser together with the Death Army guy, so he's going to hit for the first damage of the game, and he's attacking for a 1 to pass, but he's going to use Burst Riser's skill to stand him and be able to get another swing out. So he does, that was a bit unfortunate, because he 1 to passed it, and then he stood the Burst Riser, but the Burst Riser didn't have enough attack power to go through on any of these attacks either, so it was a little bit unfortunate. But Joshua does have to G-assist this one, but he does have the draw trigger in hand, so that's kind of okay, because that's, of all G-assist targets, that's probably the best one. But Joshua does find the Dragonic Overlord and manages to ride into it as well. So we can see the rest of his hand remaining as well. He does have to shuffle the remaining cards back to his deck, and then we can resume this game as well. But Sharven does have a fair number of cards in hand, and it is a little bit of a shame that he had to, he did stand that Burst Riser, but I think, banking on that front trigger there, it would have ended up being really efficient. So he attacks with the Lamb for a 21k attack, so he has to drop a 15k shield. Next up is a 10k attack on the Burst Riser. So I think this is where I think Sharven's starting to catch on to the fact that his Burst Riser is going to get targeted all the time, even with the Overlord, but he's not able to heal. And then he does get the Airmo as well. However, because he retired something, Airmo can potentially go off to get him an extra card in hand. So we'll see if he decides to do that. I think normally he should pay for the Overlord first and then use the Airmo to refund that counterblast, because the timing of the skill is the same. But it looks like he's just going to use the Airmo to get an extra card in hand, and he's not going to use the Overlord skill, as it doesn't really do that much at this stage, and it's not really worth losing a card in your hand for. So Sharven does ride into the Perfect Riser and get himself an Axel, and we do have the Maximum Riser as well, who's going to be swinging for 22k, so that's going to be on his own, which is going to be pretty big. So it's going to be a 32 with the Axel Circle, so that is a pretty big attack. He promotes the Death Army guys because he is a 9k vanilla, and then he attacks with the Maximum, attacks the Vanguard to deal 1 damage and gives the plus 10k to the Vanguard as well. So now he's attacking with the 12 to the Vanguard, so this is a 2 to pass if I'm not mistaken, and he's not able to use the Perfect Riser skill either. So that is a pretty sad first couple of turns, but Joshua still got this in his favor from the very get-go. But that doesn't mean that Sharven can't bounce back, because but on that topic, there goes the Waterfall, which also gets rid of the Maximum Riser, which is one of the big pressure attackers for Risers. So this is going to be a pretty scary turn as well. We see he plays the Cat Butler, which he does have to guard with, but that's an interesting choice as well. We haven't seen too many players play the Cat Butler, but he goes in with the Waterfall. Whether he decides to use the skill or not is a different question, but he forgot to put the first force. Okay, so there was the second force, but he didn't use the Waterfall skill, so he only attacked for 1 damage, which I think is perfectly fine, by the way, because, normally I think if you're gonna force your opponent to guard against the waterfall, like if you're using a 2 damage, they're just gonna no guard it. There's no real pressure from it in that situation. So I think that was the right call by Joshua as well. But now what Sharven's gonna do is really gonna determine the next, you know, few turns of this match, because right now, you know, he's fine on damage and his hand is kind of alright too. But so far, Joshua's just been really dominating throughout this match, and, you know, I think he needs to think carefully about what he's going to do and how he plans to proceed throughout this next turn. So he calls down the Iron Killer, so that's a 24k attacker, even if a damage trigger does happen to land, so that's alright, you know, for a first move. But he can actually use Perfect Riser skill here, so he needs to think about how, you know, what else he's going to target for that second damage. He takes it back, so let's see what he decides to do. He calls the Trance Riser, and calls down the Iron Killer after that. So the Trance Riser gets a +3 every time you call another rearguard. But he takes those back as well. Okay, he's gonna redo the turn again. You know, I see his lines of play. I see what he's trying to think, what he's thinking of doing here. And you know, these are all lines of play that I've tried to do or have done in the past as well. So let's see what he's gonna decide to do in the end. Because I think the grade 1 play was perfectly fine as long as you can call out enough units to make it so that it hits for 23 or more. So you just need to call out 2 things. So there's the Iron Killer. Will he call out anything else though? It doesn't look like it. So he's going to attack for the 20 against the rearguard, attacks for the 14 against the Vanguard. Let's see if Joshua takes the defensive trigger or not, because that could once again shut down the rest of Sharven's turn. But yep, he's going to take it, but no damage trigger this time. So this is a 12k attack to the Vanguard, if I'm not mistaken, and he stands both of the front row rearguards. So this is a 12k, so once pass gets the front, so it does pass in the end, I believe. Or normally that should have passed, I think, because that was a 12 and it would have been 23, unless he guarded and just discarded and didn't quite catch that, because I think he did. He's been discarding directly, so I think I just didn't catch his guard that turn. But he does put up Joshua 2-4 damage. He got rid of 1 trigger, so slowly he's rebuilding momentum for this turn. So he does call down the Dragonic Gaius as well, which is a really big play, because here he's going to be able to put up the Waterfall's crit to, you know, +2, meaning he's going to be dealing 3 damage if that attack connects. So he attacks with the Lam on the Iron Killer, so he's really making sure that all the big pressure attackers aren't on the field anymore. So they're just checking numbers, I believe, and all these things, because for Sharven, he needs to be really careful about how he's going to guard this next attack. So it might actually be worth to give up the Iron Killer in this case, but he is going to drop the high-powered custom instead. So he attacks with the Berserk, now gets rid of the Iron Killer, and now he uses the skill to put up the critical of the Waterfall, and I believe he also used the Waterfall skill to Soul Blast the Grade 3 and use his skills. So this is, you know, for Sharven, this is a situation where he's either going to have to take the 3 damage or he has enough to guard, because this is, if I'm not mistaken, a 43k attack, so he's going to need a lot of shield to protect that, and you know, obviously he cannot perfect guard against it, so it's just going to be normal hard guarding with whether he's, you know, grade 0s or whatever it may be. But let's see, I think they're confirming triggers, but he has to let that through, so he gets the draw and another Dragonic Gaius. So if I'm not mistaken, that's going to be 3 damage, but he gets the first heal, which he cannot use, meaning he's on 4 damage. He gets the second one, so he gets to stay alive, and that's barely survived. And if I'm not mistaken, Believe in My Existence is playing in the background, because this is definitely one of those moments we can see Sharven's getting a little bit excited, because that was definitely one tough situation. You know, Nova Grappler just generally doesn't have many cards in hand, and you know, we can see that he was quite reluctant with calling cards throughout the game, because he doesn't want to overcommit, and then, you know, especially in a matchup where his units can just get blown away from the field really easily. So that was really scary, I think, both for Sharven and I think for Joshua and everybody watching. So he does the classic play of calling down the front triggers onto the Axle Circle, but nope, takes it back. He's going to call down the Burst Riser instead with a high-powered Riser custom, and he gets the Burst Riser from the Soul. Or rather the Burst Riser from the Soul, not the Burst Riser, god, I'm just falling over my own words, but the Battle Riser. So he attacks with the Iron Killer for 14k on his 13k Vanguard. Now, Joshua can only afford to take 1 more damage. He's gonna intercept with the 5k, attacks with the Burst Riser for 19k, so that's a 10k guard. He's gonna intercept, and now let's see if Sharven decides to go for the Vanguard attack already, or if he's gonna pressure with the High Power Riser custom first. He's gonna go for, he's thinking about the Vanguard attack, but he's not sure yet, but he is gonna go for the Vanguard attack, use a 2 Counter Blast to stand both the Burst Riser and the Iron Killer, both big units. The Burst Riser normally also gets a plus 3k buff, but Joshua's gonna drop the Perfect Guard, despite this being only a 17k attack, or at least he's debating on the Perfect Guard, but the other rear guards are gonna be a bit bigger, but he is looking to be dropping the Perfect Guard. Sorry, I kind of tumbled over my own words again. So that is a Perfect Guard, so now Sharven does have his 2 checks. If he can pull out some front triggers from this, that's going to be really big. I think that's what he's counting right now and checking if he has any remaining. But any front triggers, and this is going to really swing the turn in his favor. So let's see. He does get another heal, so he's able to go down to 4 damage. The 3rd heal in a row. You know, and another one that can actually go off, so that's really, really nice. He puts it on the high powered, which is going to add the pressure of that hitting even higher, and then he gets the draw trigger, but also a Perfect Guard to his hand, so not fronts, but regardless, those are really big swings nevertheless. So he's going to attack with the Burst Riser next, so this is a 29-33 if I'm not mistaken, because he did get the plus 3k buff off of it as well, if I'm not mistaken about that as well. So this is going to be really, really big, but he still has 2 more attacks after that, potentially 3 if the high powered goes off. So let's see what Joshua decides to do. I think taking this attack is not a bad idea for Joshua, because then it's a bit easier to guard against the next ones, and then he can just deny the high powered as well, because that hitting is a lot more threatening than any of the other attacks hitting on this turn instead. So let's see what he decides to do. He has a lot of things that he can guard with. I think he's considering dropping the heal. At this angle it's a bit hard to see what he decides to guard with and what he doesn't guard with. So let's see, he does have the heal. I think he drops it for, yes, I think he did drop it for the Burst Riser. Now he attacks with a 25k high powered Riser custom, and he's gonna Perfect Guard it, so he's not letting that through. So I guess that means he's gonna let the last Iron Killer through instead, because I guess for him being on 5 damage isn't that big of a deal, especially if he has another Waterfall Dragon in his hand. But you know, there's still so much that can happen in this game. Sharven's hand, actually I'm not too sure about his hand, because that was his drop zone that he was shuffling, so I wasn't too sure about that. But okay, they're still going over the guards, they're still debating what Joshua is going to actually place for that Perfect Guard cost. So let's see what he decides to do. I think there's just so much to consider, because Joshua's hand isn't that big either, so he needs to be really careful to make sure that he doesn't accidentally give too much away to his opponent and is able to actually finish off the game next turn, because he does have good rear guards in his hand too that he doesn't want to lose, so there is quite a bit to consider here. So I think he's dropping another Perfect Guard for the Perfect Guard's cost, but he's really debating over every little card, and you know, that does make sense. This is the finals after all, and you know, those kind of situations do come to happen. So let's see what he decides to do. We can see Sharven's just kind of chilling and shuffling his drop zone, you know, just letting him think, letting him consider what he wants to do here. So let's see. Joshua's still debating over that Perfect Guard and what to do with this high powered. Is he debating on taking it? I think that's definitely out of the question. I think if he should have taken an attack, it should have been that Burst Riser, because the high powered, you know, it does have the on hit, and he does have the 1 Counter Blast to also protect himself against it. So if anything, I think it's only a 15k shield, but he's gonna drop the Perfect Guard regardless. So how bad is that hand in terms of guard power? You know, it really makes you think. But let's see what he decides to do here. So there's still a Perfect Guard, and he is dropping the Perfect Guard for a Perfect Guard and attacking with the Iron Killer, and he does take it and gets the Nahalem in his damage zone, and now he is on 5 damage. So Sharven did manage to heal back to 4, so that makes it so that, you know, if Joshua has the Waterfall, he can definitely pressure quite easily, but if he doesn't, then it's going to be a lot harder to end this game instead. So let's see how he decides to proceed in this turn. I think he does have a Berserk in his hand, so he can at least retire the Burst Riser, because he does have the Soul for it, he does have the Counter Blast for it, so he has the Counter Blast for quite a lot of stuff, but whether he has the cards in hand to pull off those kind of combos is a different question. So there comes the Berserk that I mentioned earlier, he Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1, and also it's important to mention that he didn't have the Waterfall Ride, so that's a bit of a shame, but we'll see if he can close out the game here, because Sharven's hand isn't looking too good, but he is going to need, you know, some triggers to be able to push forward, because Sharven still has 2 intercepts, so 10k shield in total, so he could potentially just take the Waterfall's attack and then just intercept against the Berserk if he doesn't get too many triggers. But we can see a Dragonic Overlord in Joshua's hand. He's gonna call it down. I think the smart play here is to Soul Blast 1 and put him up by 10k, because then it's gonna be a lot harder for Sharven to guard against this attack. So there's a lot for him to consider. This is already shaping up to be a pretty scary field, and I think it makes sense that he kept that Overlord and didn't ride it instead, because it's a lot more worth to keep the Waterfall as a 33k attacker, even if it's a vanilla, and have another strong rearguard instead of just overcommitting into the Vanguard, and that's it. So I think also, I'm not sure, I think Sharven doesn't have any cards in hand if I'm not mistaken, because he did seem like he called everything down, but I mean normally no, he would have his drive checked cards, so that would be the one of the heals and also the draw. So I think he has at least 3 cards in hand, so it's not like his hand is empty, but we just can't seem to see it on the screen right now. But we'll see how this proceeds, because in that case, you know, he can perfect guard the Waterfall, and then he can just take the Overlord and then intercept against the Berserk. There's a lot of different things he can do here, so we'll see how he decides. We know at least 20k shield and a perfect guard in Sharven's hand then, so it's a bit of a shame that we don't exactly see how many cards he has in hand, but nevertheless, this is still, you know, something we can work with. So Joshua taking it nice and long to think about what he's going to do next, because every little card placement will make a difference, you know, whether he can survive, whether he can push out for game this turn, and all these things. So he's going to use the Overlord skill to put him up by 10k, because a big rearguard is definitely going to be a lot of pressure. He's debating if he wants to call a booster for the Berserk, or if he's just going to leave it like this, because the Berserk is still going to be attacking for 13k, so he can hit for magic numbers regardless. So let's see what he decides to do, because at this stage he might just intercept for the Berserk, but it looks like he's attacking with the Berserk first. He's not going to call anything else. He's going to keep those last 2 cards in his hand and then put him up by a potential 2 or 4 depending on draw triggers. So they're checking the damage, they're checking the drop zone, and he's going to just lay it out all one by one. There aren't that many triggers in his drop zone, 2 front triggers, and there's one front trigger behind the Vanguard. So publicly, I think there's 3 front triggers and 2 heal triggers in the damage zone. So there's actually not that many triggers that we publicly know. So there's still a chance for him to damage check a trigger and then be able to fend off the attacks a bit easier. But I think the potential for him to check heals is definitely down by quite a bit. So let's see how he decides to proceed. So he's going to go with the Berserk. It seems he's finally decided to go with the Berserk and attack the Iron Killers. He's going to let that through or not. He's going to intercept with the High Power Riser. Okay, that's also fine. So he's going to attack with a 33k Dragonic Waterfall. And now he's finally picked up his hand, but he put it under the table, so we can't see how many cards he has in hand in the end. So let's see. He does have the perfect card in hand. Just 1 heal trigger isn't going to be enough. I think taking this attack is also a little bit too risky. So there's just some things to consider here for Sharven as well, because if he gets too many triggers, that Overlord is going to be unguardable. And if there's even 1 crit among them, then that's going to be the end of this game. So I think there's a lot of care that needs to go into how this turn is going to develop. But, you know, both players are really thinking carefully about every little decision, because every card placed counts. Whether it's a rearguard or a Guardian, or whether you write it or not, there's every little decision that matters here in Standard, because that's just how the format works. So let's see what he decides to do. So right now Sharven is the one that's thinking for a while, because earlier we had Joshua Lee really consider every little play, but here we have Sharven now really deciding on how he's going to guard this. But, you know, I think the Berserk aiming at a rearguard was predictable, but, you know, I think him intercepting was also quite predictable. But now we know the perfect guard, we know the heal, but we don't know the rest of his cards in hand, because he hasn't really been showing them on camera too much, and, you know, his whole hand actually hasn't been really showing up on camera to begin with. But we'll see how he decides to proceed throughout this turn, because even 1 trigger is going to make that Overlord much harder to guard, and we'll see what he decides to do. So, still debating. It is a hard decision, and, you know, seeing Nova Grapplers come this far, it's also quite amazing. But he does get the heal, and I think that's a front trigger and a perfect guard, if I'm not mistaken. I believe so. And then he just gets the heal and he passes turn. So, oh, I think that wasn't enough. Yes, that wasn't normally enough, because even though he got the heal, that was a 33k attack from the Overlord because of the skill and also the heal. And, you know, being on 12, the heal would have put him up to 32, so he needed 5k more from the intercept to actually be able to guard that. So now the Transriser gets the plus 6k from calling the 2 heals. This is a 15k attack. I think at this point, oh, he's not even going to attack with the rearguards first. He's just going to attack with the Vanguard first, try to get the fronts. Now Joshua does drop the heal trigger, but he's debating on it once again. So he's debating on every little guard, which is definitely, you know, it makes sense because there's only a few cards left in his hand, so he needs to be really careful with every card that he places. So he attacks with the Vanguard first. So this is a 17k. If he drops a 15k, he'll be at 28. That's gonna be a 2 to pass. If he puts another 5k, that's 33. And, you know, that's still 2 to pass. But here now he's on 33 normally, so that's still 2 to pass. Is he gonna make it a no pass? 38, no pass it is. So now Sharven's gonna go into his drive check, or normally he should, because I think, yeah, he did finish guarding. That was a no pass. He has 3 cards in hand. He checks a front trigger. That's very big right here, because that's going to pump up all of his attacks by quite a bit. He gets the Iron Killer, but that one front trigger was enough, I think, to make a difference, because with 3 cards in hand, I'm not sure if Joshua can actually guard this. He has a 10k. He's going to drop the Airmo, the 10k guard. He's going to drop the Tar, the 15k guard, and now finally the Transriser can take the 1 damage, and I think there's not going to be much left for Joshua to do, because he can just attack. He's going to boost up the critical of his waterfall. He doesn't have to use anything else. We know that Sharven doesn't have too many cards in hand, so this is going to be a very rough scenario for Sharven, because that's an extra crit on that waterfall. You know, if he can't guard this, he's gonna have to take that 2 damage. We've seen pretty much every heal come through for Sharven already, so there's not much left. And he gets the drive check, and there's 2 grade 3s, but no heal trigger for Sharven, and that's the end of this game. So, thank you very much for watching, as well as for CanYouSayG for providing me with the footage. And as always, don't forget to click the bell button and check out the social medias in the description, and join the Discord channel if you haven't already. But on that note, I'm gonna see you guys next time. Bye-bye.